Lady Entralian stands frozen at the edge of St. George's Church, her silk gloves trembling as she watches the man she once loved kiss his new bride. Whispers ripple through the crowd, eyes darting toward her isolated figure as her cheeks burn with humiliation. The church's golden candlelight catches the solitary tear she quickly brushes away before anyone notices. Then, like a shadow materializing from darkness, the tall, austere Marquis of Ravensleigh appears beside her, his reputation as tarnished as the scientific legacy he carries. He leans close, his breath warm against her ear, whispering 7 words that will alter both their fates forever, while the wedding bells begin their triumphant peal. Lady Entralian had known attending would be a mistake. Yet here she stood in St. George's Church, watching James Harrington, the man who had once courted her with tender promises, kiss his new bride with the passion he had never shown her. The February light filtered weakly through stained glass, illuminating her isolation among London's finest. The memories came unbidden as she stood there, paralyzed by the scene before her. 2 years ago, James had approached her at the Westbrook ball, his charming smile and easy conversation immediately capturing her attention. He had danced with her 3 times that evening, an unmistakable declaration of interest that had set tongues wagging. The following weeks had been filled with afternoon calls, carefully chaperoned walks through Hyde Park, and stolen glances across crowded ballrooms. He had brought her books of poetry, knowing her love of literature. He had listened attentively when she spoke of her passion for astronomy, never once dismissing her interests as unfeminine or inappropriate. And remembered the exact moment she had allowed herself to believe in a future with him. It was a cool autumn evening at Vauxhall Gardens. The lanterns had cast a magical glow over the pathways, and James had taken her hand as they walked, his touch sending shivers through her. He had spoken of his family's estate in Derbyshire, describing in detail the library where she could spend her days reading, the gardens where she could walk. He painted a picture of their life together so vivid that one could almost taste it. But there had been signs she had chosen to ignore. The way his attention seemed to wane whenever someone wealthier or more connected entered a room. How his visits became less frequent after the death of her maternal uncle, whose fortune she had hoped to inherit until it went to a male cousin instead. The subtle cooling of his ardor that she had attributed to proper restraint rather than diminishing interest. The final blow had come without warning. James had requested a private audience with her father, and then had allowed herself to hope, to imagine the proposal that surely must come. Instead, 3 days later, the announcement appeared in the morning papers: Mr. James Harrington was engaged to Miss Lucinda Pembroke, daughter of the wealthy industrialist Thomas Pembroke, whose fortune was estimated at over £50,000. And had not left her room for a week. The humiliation had been crushing, made worse by the pitying looks and whispered conversations that followed her everywhere. Her mother had tried to console her with platitudes about fish in the sea and better matches to come, but Anne had felt the truth in her bones: she had not been enough. Not pretty enough, not wealthy enough, not worthy enough to hold James Harrington's interest. Now, standing in this church, watching him pledge his life to another woman, and felt the full weight of that rejection pressing down upon her chest. "Dear," she overheard Lady Whitmore murmur to her companion. 3 seasons he led her on, then abandoned her for the Pembroke heiress. And stiffened, clutching her prayer book tighter. She had come to prove her indifference, to show society she remained unbroken. Instead, she had walked into her own public humiliation. The wedding party processed down the aisle. James and his new wife, radiant in pearls and satin, passed within inches of Anne. James averted his eyes, but his bride's gaze lingered, a hint of triumph in her smile that made Anne's stomach twist. The new Mrs. Harrington knew exactly what her presence here meant, knew the wound it would reopen. And felt the room constrict. The whispers grew louder, the stares more pointed. She would be the subject of tomorrow's gossip, the jilted woman who couldn't stay away. How desperate, someone whispered nearby. She should have declined the invitation. And took a step backward, seeking escape, when a tall figure materialized beside her. The crowd's murmurs shifted instantly. "The Marquis of Ravensleigh," someone breathed. "I didn't know he still attended social functions." Elias Crawford, the Marquis of Ravensleigh, cut an imposing figure in his impeccable black evening clothes. His dark hair was touched with grey at the temples despite his relatively young age of 32, giving him an air of gravity that matched his austere demeanour. His scientific family had once been celebrated throughout England until accusations of fraud had tarnished their name. Now he moved through society like a ghost, present but untouchable. Anne had never exchanged more than formal greetings with him, though she had often been aware of his presence at the few social events he attended. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet intensity that drew the eye even as his damaged reputation kept people at a distance. She had heard the whispers about his family's disgrace, about how he had abandoned his own promising scientific career to retreat into solitude after his father's death. Yet he stood beside her now, his grey eyes assessing the situation with clinical precision as the crowd began to disperse. The eyes of a scientist, Anne thought, cataloguing and analyzing even in a moment like this. He leaned down, his voice low and steady, carrying to her ears alone. "Pretend you are waiting for me." Anne blinked in confusion, her mind still reeling from the ceremony. "I beg your pardon. They're watching to see how you leave. Alone and defeated. Don't give them that satisfaction." His expression remained impassive, revealing nothing of what motivated this unexpected intervention. "Take my arm. Let them wonder why you're here." Understanding dawned slowly. He was offering her an escape from humiliation, a way to leave with dignity intact. But why would the reclusive Marquis of Ravensleigh, who avoided society whenever possible, suddenly appear to rescue a woman he barely knew? "Why would you help me?" she whispered, needing to understand his motivation before accepting. Something flickered in his eyes, a flash of shared pain quickly suppressed. "Perhaps I understand what it's like to stand alone while others whisper." The simple honesty of his words cut through her hesitation. Before she could respond, he offered his arm with a slight bow, the gesture both formal and somehow intimate in its context. After a moment's hesitation, Anne placed her gloved hand upon his arm. The fabric of his coat was fine beneath her fingers, and she could feel the solid strength of the arm beneath. The effect was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The Marquis of Ravensleigh, who rarely participated in social events, was escorting Lady Entralion from her former suitor's wedding. The narrative shifted instantly in the collective mind of London society. Perhaps she hadn't come here heartbroken and desperate after all. Perhaps there had been another reason entirely. As they walked down the church steps together, and felt the weight of speculation behind them. The Marquis maintained a respectful distance, his hand never straying to cover hers where it rested on his arm, yet his presence beside her transformed her narrative from abandoned woman to mysterious figure. "They'll talk," she murmured as they reached the street. "They always do," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of bitter experience. "But now they'll wonder instead of pity. There's power in mystery, Lady Anne." He escorted her to her waiting carriage, his movements formal and correct. As he handed her in, pausing at the step, he spoke quietly, his grey eyes meeting hers with unexpected intensity. "Sometimes perception matters more than truth, Lady Anne." "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time, truly seeing the man beneath the austere exterior. "Your kindness won't be forgotten." Something unreadable crossed his face, a shadow of emotion quickly mastered. It wasn't kindness, merely recognition. "We who have been whispered about should stand together, don't you think?" He stepped back, bowing slightly as her carriage pulled away. And watched his tall figure recede through the small window, wondering at the strange encounter that had rescued her from social disaster. There was more to the Marquis of Ravensleigh than society's gossip suggested, she thought. Much more. By morning, the whispers had already begun, taking on a life of their own as gossip always did in London society. Lady Anne and the reclusive Marquis. Had there been a secret understanding all along? Was that why she had attended the wedding? Not for James Harrington at all, but as a meeting arranged with Ravensleigh. The speculation spread through drawing rooms and morning calls like wildfire. Anne's mother arrived breathless with questions, bursting into her daughter's morning room where Anne sat trying to focus on her correspondence. "The Marquis of Ravensleigh, Anne," her mother exclaimed, dispensing with any preamble. "Is there something you haven't told me?" "We merely left the church together," Anne replied carefully, setting down her pen. "Half of London saw you. Lady Hartley swears there was clear understanding between you." Her mother sat down heavily in the chair opposite, studying her daughter's face for clues. "Is there an attachment?" Anne opened her mouth to deny it, then paused. The whispers about her heartbreak had been replaced by intrigued speculation. For the first time in months, she wasn't an object of pity. The Tun loved nothing more than a mystery, and she had inadvertently become the center of one. "I couldn't possibly comment," she finally said, taking a sip of her tea to hide her expression. Her mother's eyes widened with dawning hope. "Then there is something. Anne, this could be extraordinary. Despite the scandal surrounding his family, he's still a Marquis. The title is ancient and respected. If you could bring him back into society, restore his family's name somehow, it would be quite the coup." And turned to the window, watching the morning traffic pass by on the street below. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed from yesterday's humiliation. One whispered suggestion had changed everything. "Pretend you are waiting for me." She hadn't realized how powerful pretense could be, how quickly perception could reshape reality. The Marquis of Ravensleigh's scientific reputation had once been the envy of London. His father, the late Marquis, had revolutionized steam engine efficiency with designs that powered half of England's industrial north. Young Elias had followed in his father's footsteps, publishing papers on thermodynamics that had earned him recognition from the Royal Society before he had even reached his 25th birthday. Their name had been synonymous with innovation and brilliance until 5 years ago, when accusations of plagiarism had destroyed everything. And learned the details through whispered conversations that followed her wherever she went now that her name was linked with Ravensleigh's. The Ravensleigh designs, claimed a prominent engineer, had been stolen from his own work. Proof had been presented to the College of Engineers, documents and dates that seemed irrefutable. The Marquis had been publicly disgraced, stripped of his honors. He had died shortly thereafter, some said of a broken heart, leaving his son to inherit both title and tarnished legacy. "They say the current Marquis never recovered from the scandal," Lady Whitmore informed Anne during an afternoon call, clearly hoping to dissuade any attachment. "He abandoned his own promising scientific career entirely. He rarely appears in society, spends his days in that observatory of his, alone with his instruments and his shame. Yet he attended the Harrington wedding," and observed, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Most curious indeed," Lady Whitmore replied with narrowed eyes. "Almost as curious as your departure with him. One might wonder what connection could exist between you." The rumors of their connection had spread with astonishing speed. And neither confirmed nor denied them, finding unexpected relief in this new narrative that overshadowed her previous humiliation. Being linked to the mysterious Marquis was infinitely preferable to being James Harrington's discarded suitor. What she hadn't anticipated was James's reaction. A week after his wedding, he approached her at Lady Petton's musical evening. And had been standing near the refreshment table, trying to appear occupied when he materialized at her elbow. "Anne," he said, his handsome face creased with concern that seemed almost genuine. "There are rumors about you and Ravensleigh." "Are there?" She replied coolly, not meeting his eyes. "You can't possibly be considering an attachment to him." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "His family name is ruined. The man is practically a recluse." And felt a surge of indignation rise in her chest. "How considerate of you to concern yourself with my prospects, James, especially after securing your own so advantageously." He flinched at her tone. "I'm speaking as a friend. Ravensleigh's father was proven a fraud. The scientific community shunned him. How fortunate that I seek neither scientific acclaim nor your approval," and replied, turning away before he could see how his words still had the power to wound. "Anne, please." He caught her arm gently. I never meant to hurt you. I hope you know that. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. What you meant and what you did are two different things, James. Now if you'll excuse me, I believe the performance is about to begin. Later that evening, she found herself alone in Lady Peton's conservatory, seeking respite from curious stares and whispered conversations. The glass walls were fogged with condensation, the air heavy with the scent of orchids and exotic plants. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, letting the chill seep into her palm. The door opened behind her, and she turned to find the Marquis of Ravensleigh himself standing in the doorway. He was dressed impeccably as always, his evening clothes perfectly tailored, but there was a tension in his posture that suggested discomfort with the social setting. "Lady Anne," he said with a formal bow. "I believe we should speak privately." His presence was commanding, filling the space in a way that had nothing to do with his physical height. He moved with the careful precision of a scientist, each gesture deliberate and controlled. "Our supposed connection has become quite the topic of conversation," she acknowledged, gesturing to the bench beside her in invitation. "Indeed." He moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the glass that separated them from the garden beyond. "I hadn't intended to create such speculation. I offered you an escape from an uncomfortable moment. I didn't consider the consequences. Are you concerned about being linked to me?" Anne asked, studying his profile. In the dim light of the conservatory, his features seemed carved from stone, all sharp angles and rigid control. A faint smile touched his lips, softening his expression. "I believe the concern would traditionally be yours. My reputation is hardly an asset." "Because of your father's disgrace," she said quietly. His expression hardened, the momentary warmth vanishing. "My father was no fraud, regardless of what was proven in public record." And studied him with new interest. "You believe him innocent?" "I know him innocent." His voice was quiet but firm, vibrating with suppressed emotion. "But knowing and proving are different matters, Lady Anne. One is faith, the other requires evidence." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of music drifting faintly from the ballroom. And found herself drawn to his unwavering conviction, the fierce loyalty that survived even death and disgrace. "I came to offer you a way to end these rumors without embarrassment," he continued, turning to face her directly. "You need only indicate that our acquaintance is casual and recent. I will support whatever narrative you choose." And considered his offer. Ending the rumors would return her to her previous state, the woman abandoned by James Harrington, pitted by all of London society. "And if I don't wish to end them?" she asked, surprising herself with the words. His eyebrows rose slightly, genuine surprise crossing his usually controlled features. "You would prefer to maintain the illusion?" "The illusion has certain advantages," she admitted. "I'm no longer pitted as the woman who wasn't enough for James Harrington. Instead, I'm mysterious, intriguing even. It's a considerable improvement." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You were betrayed as well. Differently than you, but yes. He courted me for nearly 2 years, then abruptly announced his engagement to Miss Pembroke and her considerable fortune." She found herself speaking more freely than she had intended. "I believed his attentions were genuine. I allowed myself to hope for a future together. Instead, I learned that my worth was measured in pounds and connections, and I was found wanting. And now you attend their wedding, only to be whispered about," he said, nodding slowly. "We have more in common than I realized. A shared experience with public humiliation," and said with unexpected candor, meeting his gray eyes directly. "Not the most romantic foundation for a connection, but perhaps an honest one." He studied her with new interest, his scientific mind clearly reassessing his initial conclusions. "If you wish to maintain this understanding between us, I have no objection. It might benefit us both. You escape pity, and I." He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "I find solitude less appealing than I once did." A mutual arrangement then, and clarified, wanting the terms clear between them. We allow society to believe what it wishes, within the bounds of propriety. Nothing that would compromise your reputation, he agreed immediately. We would appear together at select social functions, perhaps exchange visits. A courtship in appearance only. And considered the proposal carefully. A false connection to the Marquis would shield her from pity while giving her time to recover her dignity. And perhaps, in the process, she might learn more about this enigmatic man whose reputation had been as damaged as her heart. I accept your arrangement, Lord Ravensleigh. Elias, he corrected her, his voice softening slightly. If we're to convince society of our connection, you should use my given name, at least in private. Then you must call me Anne, she replied, extending her hand. He took it, his grip firm and warm even through their gloves. The handshake felt oddly momentous, sealing an agreement that neither could have predicted would lead them somewhere neither expected. As they rejoined the party, his hand lightly touching her elbow in a gesture of casual possession, and felt the weight of curious stares. But for the first time in months, the gazes held interest rather than pity. Lady Worthington actually smiled at her, a genuine expression of approval. Even Lady Whitmore seemed impressed despite her earlier warnings. Their shared deception had begun. Neither could have predicted where it would lead them, or how quickly pretense would blur into something far more dangerous and real. The College of Engineers Patent Hall stood imposing against the grey London sky, its neoclassical columns rising like sentinels guarding the nation's intellectual treasures. And hesitated at the bottom of the stone steps, her hand resting on the iron railing as she gazed up at the building that held the key to Elias's obsession. Having second thoughts? He asked, offering his arm with a slight smile that transformed his usually austere features. I'm not sure I'll be of any use, she admitted, placing her hand on his arm. I know nothing of engineering or patents. My education was limited to music, French, and needlework, as befits a lady. Sometimes fresh eyes see what familiar ones miss, he replied as they climbed the steps together. Besides, our arrangement benefits from public appearances. We've been seen together at 3 social events now. A visit to the Patent Hall continues the narrative of our connection. Over the past 3 weeks, their false understanding had evolved into something unexpected, a genuine friendship. And had discovered Elias to be thoughtful and intelligent, if guarded. He spoke little of his father's disgrace, but she sensed it drove his every action, coloring every decision he made. There was a wound there that had never properly healed, festering beneath his controlled exterior. Inside the Patent Hall, the ceiling soared overhead, domed and painted with allegorical scenes of human innovation. Prometheus bringing fire to mankind, Archimedes discovering displacement in his bath, Newton beneath his apple tree. Rows of mahogany cabinets lined the walls, each containing the documented history of British ingenuity. Every drawer holding drawings and specifications that had shaped the modern world. This is where my father's work is stored, Elias explained, leading her toward a section marked Steam Improvements 1830 to 1845. And where his reputation was destroyed. The cabinets stood like silent witnesses to past glories and present disgrace. And watched as Elias's jaw tightened, his fingers trailing along the brass labels with something approaching reverence. How? She asked softly, sensing the depth of his pain. Thomas Pembroke presented evidence that my father's valve compression designs were copied from his earlier work. His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. The dates on the official record supported his claim. The college had no choice but to rule in Pembroke's favor. And froze, her hand tightening on his arm. Pembroke. Any relation to James Harrington's new father-in-law? The very same. Elias's expression was grim, his grey eyes hard as steel. Pembroke's daughter married your former suitor last month. And felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. The implications cascaded through her mind. You knew this connection existed between us? I suspected it when I saw you at the wedding, he admitted, having the grace to look uncomfortable. It was partly why I approached you. The symmetry seemed too perfect to ignore, both of us wounded by the same family's machinations. You used me, she said, stepping back, feeling the sting of another betrayal. "No more than you used me to salvage your pride," he countered, but his voice lacked heat. He ran a hand through his dark hair, disrupting its careful arrangement. "But that's not why we're here now, Anne. I believe Pembroke falsified records to discredit my father. I've been searching for proof for 5 years. And should have been angry at his calculation, at the revelation that their meeting had been less accidental than she'd believed. But something in his intensity, the desperate hope barely concealed beneath his controlled exterior, made her pause. "What makes you so certain of your father's innocence?" she asked, needing to understand what drove him. "I knew him," Elias said simply, and in those 3 words, "and heard a lifetime of love and loss." He turned to face her fully, letting her see the raw emotion he usually kept hidden. "My father was many things, brilliant, obsessive, sometimes difficult. But he was not a thief. And I've studied his work my entire life. The designs Pembroke claimed as his own bear my father's unmistakable methodology." He pulled open a drawer, removing a folder of technical drawings with hands that trembled slightly. "See these compression calculations? This was my father's innovation. He taught me the principles when I was 15 years old. I watched him develop this system over months of experiments. And examined the drawings, noting dates and signatures written in careful script. These indicate Pembroke's submission preceded your father's by 8 months. Exactly. His finger traced the dates. But my father documented his process meticulously. He kept detailed notebooks of every experiment, every calculation, every failure and success. I've never found his technical notebook for this project, the one that would prove when he developed these concepts. Without it, all I have is my word against official records, and my word means nothing to the college." They spent hours examining records, Elias explaining technical concepts with surprising patience. And found herself drawn into the mystery despite her limited understanding of engineering principles. There was something compelling about the way his mind worked, the systematic approach to problem solving, the refusal to accept surface conclusions without evidence. As afternoon light faded through the tall windows, painting the mahogany cabinets in shades of amber and gold, a clerk approached them. "The archives close in 30 minutes, my lord." Elias nodded, gathering their materials with visible reluctance. "One last cabinet," he told Anne. "The cross-referenced patent applications. Sometimes related patents are filed together, and there might be something in the associated documents." The final cabinet was dusty, clearly less frequently accessed than the others. As Elias pulled open a particularly stiff drawer, and noticed a leather-bound volume wedged behind it, as if it had fallen and been forgotten, trapped in a narrow space between drawer and cabinet back. "What's this?" She carefully extracted it, her fingers coming away dusty. Elias took it from her, his entire body going still. His fingers trembled as he traced the embossed crest on the leather cover. "This binding," he whispered. "My father had his notebooks custom-made with our family crest embossed. I would recognize this anywhere." He opened it with the care one might use handling ancient parchment, his breath catching audibly. "And, this is it. My father's missing technical notebook." The pages were filled with detailed drawings, calculations, and dated entries, all in the same careful hand. Elias flipped frantically through them, his excitement palpable as he searched for the crucial evidence. He stopped at a section dated 18 months before Pembroke's submission, his hands shaking as he held the page to the fading light. "Here," he breathed. "The complete valve compression system, fully documented. Every calculation, every design iteration." His voice shook with emotion barely contained. "And look at this notation." And leaned closer to read the small script at the bottom of the page. "Discussed preliminary concept with TP today. Showed basic calculations only." He seemed quite interested in the theoretical applications. TP, Thomas Pembroke, and said, understanding dawning. "My father mentored younger engineers," Elias explained, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Pembroke was one of his students. He must have seen enough to grasp the concept, then claimed it as his own before my father could complete his work and file the patent. He looked up, his eyes bright with vindication and unshed tears. This proves my father developed the system first. Every date, every notation, it's all here. This is what Pembroke tried to make disappear. But how did the notebook end up hidden here? And wondered, examining the narrow space where it had been trapped. This wasn't accidental. Someone wedged it deliberately behind this drawer. Someone wanted it to disappear, Elias said grimly, his expression hardening. Someone with access to the archives, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. They left the patent hall as it closed, the attendants ushering them out with the day's final visitors. Elias carefully secured the notebook inside his coat, holding it against his chest as if it were the most precious treasure in England. Outside, darkness had fallen. The first stars appearing above London's skyline, barely visible through the coal smoke and fog. "Will you come to my home?" he asked, his voice urgent. "I have an observatory where we can examine the notebook more carefully, where we won't be disturbed or observed. I need to catalogue every page, verify every date against the official records." And hesitated, aware of the impropriety of visiting a bachelor's home in the evening. The rules of society were clear on such matters, and she had already courted enough scandal. "My housekeeper will be present," he added quickly, understanding her concern. "Mrs. Patterson has been with my family for 30 years. She's the soul of propriety." His grey eyes held hers, pleading. "This is too important to wait until morning, Anne. 5 years I've been searching for this proof. 5 years of doubt and whispers. Please." The raw vulnerability in his voice decided her. "Very well. But only for an hour." At Ravensleigh House, they climbed 4 flights of stairs to the domed observatory that crowned the building. The room was everything Anne had imagined and more. Glass panels revealed the night sky while brass instruments gleamed in the lamplight, their polished surfaces reflecting the flames. A large telescope dominated one side of the room, pointed toward the heavens. Charts and calculations covered a workbench, evidence of Elias's continued scientific pursuits despite his public withdrawal from the field. They spread the notebook on a large table, its pages crackling slightly with age. Elias lit several lamps, arranging them to illuminate the work without casting shadows. As he explained a particularly complex calculation, his hand accidentally brushed hers where both rested on the page. Both froze at the contact, their eyes meeting. For the first time, Anne saw beyond his scientific focus to the man beneath. Passionate, determined, wounded by injustice, but refusing to surrender. His grey eyes held hers, and she saw her own loneliness reflected there, the isolation that came from being whispered about, set apart from normal society. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "For believing me when no one else would. For being here now. For caring about something that matters to me more than anything else in this world." In that moment, Anne realized their arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated. A connection based not on social convenience or mutual advantage, but on trust and shared purpose. Something real and precious and terrifying in its intensity. The discovery of the notebook changed everything. Elias became consumed with building his case, spending long hours comparing his father's documentation with the official patent records. He made meticulous notes, cross-referencing dates and technical details, building an argument so thorough that no reasonable person could dismiss it. And found herself drawn deeper into his quest, visiting Ravensleigh House nearly every afternoon. Their false understanding provided the perfect cover for their investigation, though Anne knew her motivations had shifted. She no longer came merely to maintain appearances. She came because she believed in Elias's cause, because she admired his dedication, and because his company had become essential to her happiness. "The notebook alone isn't enough," Elias explained one evening as they sat in his study, the room warm with firelight. Papers and drawings covered every surface, evidence of his obsessive research. Pembroke could claim it was fabricated after the fact, that the dates were falsified. We need corroborating evidence, something that exists in the public record. What about the mechanical model? Anne suggested, looking up from the technical drawing she'd been studying. You mentioned your father built working models of his designs to demonstrate their functionality. The original model was presented to the college during the investigation. Elias ran a hand through his hair in frustration, leaving it charmingly disheveled. It disappeared afterward, probably destroyed to eliminate evidence. Pembroke likely has it, or had it, but I have no way to access it without proof of wrongdoing, and I need the model to prove the wrongdoing. It's circular logic that's trapped me for 5 years. And considered this, an idea forming in her mind. Perhaps I do have a way. The Harringtons are hosting a scientific exhibition next week, displaying innovations that have shaped modern Britain. James's father-in-law will certainly display his achievements. If the model still exists, it will be there. You would attend? Elias asked, genuine surprise in his voice. After what happened at the wedding? With you beside me? Yes. And smiled faintly. Our arrangement has its advantages, after all. We can examine the model openly, in public. Who would question a lady and her suitor taking interest in scientific displays? That night, as Elias walked her to her carriage, following the proper forms even though propriety had long since been stretched by her frequent visits, he hesitated at the door. I've been meaning to show you something, he said, his voice oddly uncertain. He led her back inside to a small room adjoining his study, a space she hadn't noticed before. Inside was a drafting table covered with legal documents, their edges weighted down with smooth river stones. I've been preparing a formal petition to the College of Engineers, he explained, gesturing to the papers. To reopen my father's case. With the notebook as evidence, I believe I have grounds for a review. And examined the papers, noting the careful legal language, the systematic presentation of evidence. Then she noticed a legal draft with a name crossed out, scored through so heavily the pen had nearly torn the paper. Looking closer, she realized it was her own name, listed as a witness, then deliberately removed. You included me as a witness, then removed me, she observed, touching the crossed-out lines. Elias looked uncomfortable, his controlled composure slipping. Initially, yes. You found the notebook. Your testimony would be valuable, could verify the circumstances of its discovery. Then why remove me? She turned to face him directly, needing to see his eyes. His eyes met hers, and she saw conflict there, duty warring with something deeper. Because involving you would place you in direct opposition to the Harringtons and Pembrokes. Your reputation would suffer. You would be choosing sides in a scandal that has already destroyed one family. I couldn't ask that of you in good conscience. And felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the nearby hearth. She had assumed their arrangement was one of mutual convenience, two wounded people helping each other navigate society's treacherous waters. Yet here was evidence that he had been protecting her, placing her welfare above his quest for justice. You should have consulted me, she said softly, her hand finding his. I'm not a porcelain doll to be kept safe on a shelf. I can make my own decisions about acceptable risks. Would you have agreed to be excluded? He asked, already knowing the answer. No, she admitted. But I should have been given the choice. That's what respect means, Elias. Trusting someone enough to let them choose, even when you fear they might choose danger. He turned his hand to capture hers, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I'm not accustomed to having someone who cares enough to take such risks. It changes everything, doesn't it? Having someone to protect, someone whose happiness matters as much as vindication. The week before the exhibition, pressure mounted from unexpected quarters. Anne's brother, Viscount Hartley, visited her at home, his expression stern as he was shown into the morning room where she sat reading. This has gone beyond a casual understanding, Anne, he said without preamble, clearly too agitated for social niceties. Mother says you visit his home regularly. The entire ton is talking about an imminent engagement. We share common interests, she replied carefully, setting aside her book. We've become friends. Friends, he scoffed. You're risking your reputation and our family's standing for friendship. His interest is in restoring his family name, no matter the cost. Don't be a fool, Anne. The dismissiveness in his tone, the assumption that she was incapable of judging character or making sound decisions, ignited her anger. I'm not the fool who believed James Harrington's promises, she said sharply. I've learned to judge character more carefully now. The Pembrokes are powerful, connected to half the aristocracy through marriage now, her brother continued, his voice rising. Opposing them would be social suicide for our entire family. Perhaps some things matter more than social standing, Anne countered, rising to face him. Perhaps integrity matters more than invitation lists. Her brother's expression hardened. End this attachment before it damages our family. The Marquis is using you to restore his name. The accusation stung, especially given what she had discovered about Elias's attempt to protect her. That evening, she confronted him at the observatory, where they had taken to spending their evenings examining documents. My family believes you're using me to rebuild your reputation, she said without preamble as she entered the room. Elias looked up from the telescope he'd been adjusting, his face unreadable in the lamplight. And what do you believe? I believe you removed my name from your legal petition to protect me, not yourself, she answered, moving closer. Which suggests the opposite of using me. He was silent for a long moment, his hands stilling on the brass instrument. Our arrangement has become complicated, hasn't it? Yes, she agreed, standing beside him now. It has. We began with pretense, and somewhere along the way, it became real. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense in the dim light. For me, it became real the moment you demanded to be included despite the risk. When you insisted on making your own choices rather than being protected. That's when I knew. Knew what? She whispered, her heart racing. That I had fallen in love with you. Not the arrangement, not the convenience, but you. Entralian, who refuses to be diminished by others' judgments. Who stands beside me even when it costs her. Before she could respond, he cupped her face gently. May I kiss you? Not as part of our arrangement, but because I love you and cannot pretend otherwise any longer. Yes, she breathed, and his lips met hers in a kiss that erased all pretense, all doubt, all fear. The Harrington Scientific Exhibition arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, a glittering affair that showcased technological innovations in a grand hall decorated with bunting and gas lights. And entered on Elias's arm, feeling James's startled gaze follow them through the crowd. She noticed how he immediately moved toward his father-in-law, no doubt warning him of their presence. The main hall featured displays of mechanical models, each behind glass cases with brass plaques describing their function and inventor. In the center of the room, prominently displayed on a raised platform, was a glass case containing a brass and steel contraption labeled Pembroke Valve Compression System, Patent 1843. Elias stiffened beside her, his hand tightening on her arm. That's my father's model, he said quietly, though his voice vibrated with controlled fury. They circled the display cautiously, and pretending casual interest while Elias studied every detail with his trained eye. The brass plate affixed to the base bore Thomas Pembroke's name and the date of his patent. It's been modified, Elias whispered, leaning closer to the glass. See the secondary valve assembly? It's been replaced. The original had my father's distinctive curved housing. This linear one is cruder, simpler. As they studied it, Thomas Pembroke himself approached, a distinguished gentleman with sharp eyes and a politician's smooth smile. He was accompanied by James, who looked uncomfortable but stood loyally beside his father-in-law. Lord Ravensleigh, Pembroke said with false warmth. I hadn't expected you to attend. I was curious to see my father's work on display, Elias replied with equal smoothness, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. Pembroke's smile tightened dangerously. Your father's discredited claims have no place here. This system is my design, as legally established by the College of Engineers. Curious how the model has been altered since it was presented to the college, Elias observed, his tone conversational but his words cutting. The original secondary valve assembly had a curved housing, not this linear one. I have my father's detailed drawings that show the original design. Something flashed in Pembroke's eyes, alarm quickly masked by disdain. You're mistaken. This model is exactly as it was presented. My father's notebook suggests otherwise, Elias said quietly, but his words carried to the growing circle of interested listeners. The notebook that was hidden in the Patent Hall archives for 5 years. The one that documents his development of this entire system 18 months before your patent application. Pembroke's composure slipped momentarily, his face paling. Notebook? What notebook? His voice was too loud, too sharp, betraying his agitation. The one documenting every stage of development, including a notation about showing preliminary calculations to his student, T.P., Elias continued relentlessly. Thomas Pembroke. You saw enough to understand the concept, then filed your own patent before my father completed his work. The crowd around them had grown silent, all pretense of polite disinterest abandoned. This was scandal unfolding in real time, and London society loved nothing more than scandal. Pembroke recovered quickly, his politician's instincts taking over. Fabricated evidence will only further damage your reputation, Ravensley. I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself and your companion. His gaze shifted meaningfully to Anne, the threat clear in his eyes. And felt Elias tense beside her, preparing to respond with further accusations that would only make things worse. She squeezed his arm gently, a silent plea for restraint, then stepped forward herself. Mr. Pembroke, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the now silent hall. I found that notebook myself in the college archives. I can testify to its authenticity, its age, and the dust that covered it from years of concealment. Unless you're suggesting I fabricated a 5-year-old document. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Anne's intervention had shifted the dynamic, her social standing and gender making it harder for Pembroke to dismiss the claim as mere male rivalry. Lady Anne, you've been deceived by a desperate man, Pembroke tried, but his voice lacked conviction now. I've been many things, Mr. Pembroke, Anne replied coolly. But deceived is not one of them. I know what I found, and I know what it proves. James stepped forward then, his face troubled. Anne, please. Don't involve yourself in this. Think of your reputation. She turned to him, seeing clearly for the first time the weakness she had once mistaken for gentleness. My reputation will survive truth, James. The question is whether yours will. Later, as they rode home in tense silence, Anne finally spoke. He's frightened. Did you see how he reacted when you mentioned the notebook? He also knows he has the power to destroy what remains of your social standing, Elias said grimly, staring out the carriage window. I won't allow that, Anne. I'll withdraw the petition before I let him hurt you. Anne placed her hand over his, drawing his attention back to her. Perhaps that's not your decision to make. We're partners in this now, Elias. You don't get to protect me by making choices without me. In the darkness of the carriage, their eyes met, and she saw the fear beneath his determination, the terror of losing her that drove his protective instincts. I love you, he said simply. The thought of you being hurt because of my quest for justice is unbearable. Then trust me to make my own choices, she replied. Trust that I'm strong enough to stand beside you, whatever comes. He pulled her close then, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of desperation and hope intertwined. The summons from the College of Engineers arrived a week after the exhibition. The board had agreed to review new evidence in the Ravensley case, scheduling a formal hearing for the following month. The news spread through London society like wildfire, dividing the ton into camps, those who believed in Ravensley's cause and those who stood with the powerful Pembroke family. Elias brought the letter to Anne immediately, finding her in her family's drawing room. They've granted us an audience, he said, handing her the official document. But Pembroke will fight viciously. There's still time for you to distance yourself from this. They sat together on the settee, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the carpet. And read the summons carefully, noting the formal language that disguised the drama of what was to come. If I distance myself now, what message does that send? She asked. That I believe in justice only when it's convenient. That I lack the courage of my convictions. Your brother visited me yesterday, Elias revealed, his jaw tight. He made it clear your family objects to your involvement. He threatened to cut off your allowance, to make life difficult for you if you proceed. And wasn't surprised. Her family valued their social position above all else. And what did you tell him? That I would release you from our arrangement immediately. His eyes held hers steadily. That I never intended to compromise your standing in society, and that I would do whatever necessary to protect you. How noble, she said with unexpected sharpness, setting the letter aside. Did it not occur to you to ask what I wanted? And, No, Elias. She stood, pacing the room with agitation. From the beginning, men have been deciding my fate without consulting me. James decided I wasn't worth marrying. My brother decides which attachments are suitable. Now you decide to release me. She turned to face him, her eyes flashing. I am not a possession to be claimed or released. I am a person with my own will, my own choices. Elias watched her, something like admiration flickering across his features despite the tension. You're right. I apologize. I don't want your apology. I want your respect. She returned to her seat, her resolve strengthening. Do you believe I understand the consequences of testifying? Yes, he admitted. Then trust me to make my own decision. She took his hand. Now tell me how we prepare for the hearing. The day before the hearing, James Harrington appeared at Anne's door. She received him with cool politeness, maintaining the proper distance between them in the formal drawing room. Anne, he began awkwardly, standing near the fireplace. I've come to warn you. My father-in-law is prepared to discredit anyone who testifies against him. Your reputation. My reputation, she interrupted calmly, seems to concern everyone but me. Tell me, James, how much of your concern is genuine, and how much is your father-in-law's instructions? He flinched. I never meant for things to become this complicated. The patent issue, your involvement with Ravensleigh. You don't understand what's at stake, he continued, moving closer. Ravensleigh is using you to restore his name. Once he achieves that, where will it leave you? Where I choose to be, Anne replied firmly. Unlike some people, Elias respects my ability to make my own decisions. James flinched again at the barb. I'm trying to protect you. As you protected me when you courted me for 2 years then married someone else. She shook her head. Your protection is neither wanted nor needed, James. What would be appreciated is honesty. His shoulders sagged slightly. Very well. Did you know about your father-in-law's theft of the Ravensleigh designs when you married his daughter? His hesitation told her everything. It's complicated, Anne. The patent system, the evidence presented. Is theft complicated? Is fraud complicated? She studied the man she had once thought she loved, seeing clearly now the moral flexibility that had always been there. I thought you were a better man than this. Pembroke will destroy you both, James warned, his final attempt at persuasion. He's already arranged for witnesses to question your character, to suggest impropriety in your visits to Ravensleigh House. Then he clearly doesn't know me at all, Anne replied, rising to indicate the conversation was over. Nor does he understand that some things matter more than society's good opinion. Truth, for instance. Justice. Love. As James left, defeated, and felt a strange sense of liberation. She had finally seen him clearly, without the distortion of her own hopes and insecurities. He was not a villain, merely a weak man who had chosen comfort over courage. She deserved better, and she had found it. The College of Engineers occupied an imposing building near Parliament, its boardroom a solemn chamber panelled in dark wood with high windows that admitted cold northern light. When Anne entered beside Elias on the morning of the hearing, the room was already filled with engineers, legal representatives, and curious observers drawn by the scandal. At the front sat the board members behind a curved mahogany table, 5 distinguished gentlemen who would decide the fate of the Ravensleigh name. To one side sat Thomas Pembroke with his legal team, looking confident despite the threat to his reputation. On the other side, Elias had only Anne and his own conviction. The hearing began with formal procedures, the reading of charges and countercharges, the establishment of evidence to be presented. Then Elias rose to present his case, his voice steady as he detailed his father's work and Pembroke's theft. He displayed the notebook, walking the board members through each entry, each dated calculation that preceded Pembroke's patent by 18 months. He explained the technical details with clarity, making complex engineering concepts comprehensible to laymen. And watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to interest as Elias built his methodical argument. Then Pembroke's representative rose, a sharp-faced solicitor who specialized in patent law. Lord Ravensleigh's evidence is circumstantial at best, fabricated at worst, he declared with practiced disdain. A convenient notebook appearing years after the fact hardly constitutes proof. How do we know this wasn't created recently to support false claims? The notebook was found in the college's own archives, Elias countered, his voice calm despite the insult. Wedged behind a cabinet drawer where it had clearly fallen years ago. The dust, the aged leather, the faded ink, all indicate its authenticity. Conveniently found by a woman with no scientific training, the representative sneered, gesturing toward Anne. A woman whose connection to Lord Ravensleigh began under suspicious circumstances at a wedding where she was reportedly heartbroken over another man. One might question both her motives and her credibility. Murmurs spread through the room. Anne felt the weight of judgment pressing down, the assumptions about her character, her intelligence, her honesty. But she kept her posture straight, her expression composed, refusing to be diminished. Lady Entralien's character is not on trial here, Elias said sharply, taking a step forward. Keep your insinuations to the evidence at hand. But her credibility certainly is, Pembroke himself interjected, rising to address the board with the confidence of a man accustomed to being heard. Gentlemen of the board, we have witnesses who will testify that Lady Anne formed an attachment to Lord Ravensleigh immediately following her public humiliation at another gentleman's wedding. One might question whether a woman in such emotional distress would manufacture evidence to please a new suitor, to secure an advantageous match despite his tarnished name. And felt rather than saw Elias tense beside her, preparing to defend her. But before he could speak, she stood, her movement drawing all eyes to her. Gentlemen of the board, she said, her voice clear and steady despite her racing heart. Mr. Pembroke seems determined to question my character rather than address the evidence before you. Perhaps because the evidence speaks for itself, and character assassination is his only remaining defense. She moved forward, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room, feeling the judgment and the doubt, but also feeling her own strength rising to meet it. I have no scientific expertise, that is true, she continued. But I can testify to what I found and where I found it. The notebook was wedged behind a drawer in the patent archives, as if deliberately hidden. I can describe the exact location, the condition of the leather, the amount of dust that covered it. I can testify that I had no idea what I had found until Lord Ravensleigh examined it. I did not fabricate this evidence. I discovered it. A convenient claim, Pembroke scoffed, but his confidence was beginning to crack. No more convenient than the modifications made to the mechanical model you displayed at your exhibition, and countered, her voice growing stronger. Lord Ravensleigh noted that the secondary valve assembly had been altered from its original design. The notebook confirms this, showing detailed drawings of the original curved housing that was replaced with a linear one on your model. You changed the physical evidence to hide its true origins. Surprised murmurs filled the room. And had studied the notebook so carefully in preparation, had memorized the technical details that would support their case, understanding that her testimony would be crucial. Furthermore, she continued, warming to her subject, the notebook contains a specific entry where the late Marquis records showing preliminary calculations to T.P. Thomas Pembroke, who was his student at the time. This suggests Mr. Pembroke had access to the concepts he later claimed as his own. The dates are consistent, the handwriting is clearly aged, and the technical progression shows genuine development over time rather than the static presentation of a finished design. The board chairman leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. Lady Anne, are you willing to submit a formal sworn statement regarding the discovery of this notebook? I am, she replied without hesitation, meeting his gaze directly. I am willing to testify under oath about every detail of that discovery, knowing the penalties for perjury. Despite the potential damage to your social standing? Pembroke interjected, making one final attempt. Associating yourself publicly with this case will not be viewed favorably in certain circles, Lady Anne. You risk much for a man you've known only a few months. And turned to face him fully, no longer intimidated by his power or his threats. Some things matter more than social approval, Mr. Pembroke. Truth is one of them. Justice is another. And love, she added, her eyes finding Elias's, true love built on respect and trust rather than convenience and money, is worth any risk. The room erupted in whispers. Anne had just declared her feelings publicly, irrevocably linking her fate to Elias's regardless of the hearing's outcome. As she returned to her seat, Elias caught her hand briefly, squeezing it in silent gratitude and admiration. The gesture was small but intimate, witnessed by everyone present. In that moment, their pretend attachment became undeniably, publicly real. The hearing continued for hours, with technical experts examining the notebook, questioning both sides, comparing handwriting samples and ink aging. Pembroke's defense grew increasingly desperate, his arguments contradicting each other as he tried to explain away evidence that was overwhelming in its accumulated weight. Finally, as afternoon light began to fade through the high windows, the board chairman called for a recess to deliberate. Anne and Elias were escorted to a private antechamber to wait. Alone at last, the tension of the day finally caught up with them. You were magnificent, Elias said softly, taking both her hands in his. The way you stood up to Pembroke, the way you presented the evidence. Anne, you were absolutely magnificent. I meant what I said, she replied, meeting his eyes. About truth and justice and love. I wasn't performing for the board. I was speaking from my heart. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like wonder. He took her face gently in his hands. Our arrangement began as a convenience, he said. A way for you to avoid humiliation and for me to move more freely in society. But somewhere along the way, it became the most real thing in my life. For me too, she whispered. I don't know exactly when it happened, when pretense became truth, but it did. I love you, Entralian. He said it clearly, no longer hiding behind propriety or arrangement. Not because you found my father's notebook, not because you're helping restore his name, but because of who you are. Your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to be diminished by others' judgments. You are extraordinary, and I love you with everything I am. Before she could respond, he kissed her, deeply and thoroughly, no longer constrained by the rules of their false courtship. This was real, passionate, a promise of forever. When they finally broke apart, Anne was breathless, her heart racing. I love you too, she said. I think I have for weeks, maybe from that first moment in the church when you offered me your arm and your protection. They were summoned back to hear the board's decision before she could say more. The room fell silent as they entered, every eye on them as they took their seats. The board chairman rose, his expression grave but his eyes kind. After careful review of all evidence presented, he announced, this board finds that sufficient doubt has been cast on the original ruling in the Pembroke patent case to warrant its reversal. Gasps filled the room. Pembroke half rose from his seat, his face ashen. The technical notebook presented by Lord Ravensleigh, verified as authentic by 3 independent experts, clearly establishes that the late Marquis of Ravensleigh developed the valve compression system prior to Mr. Pembroke's patent filing. The chairman's voice grew stronger. Furthermore, the modifications to the physical model suggest an attempt to obscure evidence of origin. This board therefore rules that the patent be transferred to the Ravensleigh estate, and that the late Marquis's scientific reputation be fully restored. The gavel fell, the sound echoing through the chamber like a bell of vindication. Elias sat frozen for a moment, hardly believing what he'd just heard. 5 years of searching, of doubt, of carrying the weight of his father's supposed disgrace, and finally, justice. And took his hand, squeezing it tight, and he turned to her with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for believing when no one else would." The room erupted in conversations as people processed the dramatic reversal. Pembroke fled quickly, unable to face the whispers that now turned against him. James followed, not meeting Anne's eyes as he passed. But Anne barely noticed. She was too busy watching Elias, seeing the burden of 5 years lifted from his shoulders, seeing him finally free to be the man he was meant to be. The victory spread through London society like wildfire, transforming perceptions overnight. The Marquis of Ravensleigh, once shunned as the son of a disgraced fraud, became the romantic figure who had fought tirelessly to restore his father's legacy against powerful opposition. His dedication, his intelligence, his unwavering loyalty to truth were now celebrated rather than pitted. Lady Entralian, rather than being pitted for her broken attachment to James Harrington, was admired for her moral courage. She became known as the woman who had risked everything for justice and love, who had stood beside the man she loved despite social pressure and threats. Her testimony had been crucial to the case, and society recognized her contribution with a respect she had never received as merely a pretty face in a ballroom. Thomas Pembroke faced professional disgrace, though his family connections and wealth shielded him from complete ruin. He withdrew from public life, his reputation permanently tarnished. James Harrington found his marriage strained by the scandal, his weak character finally exposed for all to see. 3 months after the hearing, on a beautiful May morning, Anne received a hand-delivered letter from Elias. Inside was an invitation, not to a social event, but to St. George's Church, the very place where their journey had begun. "Meet me where we first stood together," the note read in his familiar hand. "I have something to ask you." Her heart racing, and dressed carefully in a gown of pale blue silk, her mother fussing over her hair and jewels, knowing without being told that this was a momentous day. When Anne arrived at the church, she found it empty except for Elias, standing in the exact spot where he had first appeared beside her like a shadow materializing from darkness. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floor. "This is where we began," Elias said simply, taking both her hands in his. "Where I asked you to pretend you were waiting for me." And looked around, memories of that painful day resurfacing, but now without their sting. "I was so humiliated that day. I thought my life was over because a man had rejected me, because society was whispering about my failure. And now?" he asked softly. "Now I understand that day wasn't an ending. It was a beginning." She smiled at him. "The most important beginning of my life." They walked slowly down the aisle together, their footsteps echoing in the empty church. When they reached the altar, Elias turned to face her, his expression serious but his eyes warm with love. "I brought you here because I wanted to replace that memory with a better one," he said. "This place shouldn't represent humiliation in your mind. It should represent choice and truth and the moment our real life together began." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a sapphire ring surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light streaming through the windows. "Our arrangement began with pretense," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But it grew into something real, something precious beyond measure. I find I no longer want to pretend, Anne. I want everything to be real between us. No more false courtship, no more convenient arrangement." He dropped to one knee, looking up at her with such love that Anne felt tears spring to her eyes. I'm not asking you to pretend anymore, Anne. I'm asking you to be my wife. Not for convenience or social standing, not to restore my family name or salvage your reputation, but because I love you with every fiber of my being. Because life without you would be unbearable. Because you are my partner, my equal, the person who saw me when I was invisible and believed in me when no one else would. Yes, she whispered, unable to speak louder through the tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, Elias. I'll marry you. Not because of what society expects or what's convenient, but because I love you completely. He slipped the ring on her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and promise they had been restraining for months. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at once, giddy with the freedom of finally being completely honest about their feelings. When did you know? Anne asked, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. When did pretense become real for you? In the observatory, he replied, stroking her hair gently. When you questioned why I'd removed your name from the legal petition. You demanded the right to choose your own path, even if it led to difficulty. You refused to be protected or managed or treated as anything less than an equal partner. That's when I knew I loved you, when I realized I wanted to spend the rest of my life with someone that strong, that brave, that magnificent. And you? He tilted her chin up to look into her eyes. When did you know? The same moment, she admitted. When I saw that you had tried to protect me at cost to your own case. When I realized that you saw me not as a tool to be used or a burden to be protected, but as a person worthy of respect and trust. That's when I knew you were different from any man I'd ever known. That's when I knew I loved you. The ceremony took place 3 weeks later in the same church, but this time with a small gathering of carefully chosen guests. Anne's mother attended, having been won over by Elias's obvious devotion and restored reputation. Her brother came reluctantly, still disapproving but unable to deny that, and seemed happier than he had ever seen her. A few of Elias's scientific colleagues attended, men who had believed in his father's innocence even when society had not. And to Anne's surprise, several women who had once whispered about her at social gatherings came to witness her triumph, their earlier pity transformed into genuine admiration. James Harrington was not invited, though Anne heard later that he had seen the announcement in the papers. She felt neither satisfaction nor regret at his absence, only a sense of closure. He belonged to a different chapter of her life, one that had ended the moment Elias had appeared at her side in this very church. No grand reception followed the ceremony, no elaborate celebration designed to impress society. Instead, they returned to Ravensleigh House, where Elias led his new wife up the winding staircase to the observatory that had become the true center of their courtship. The domed glass ceiling revealed a darkening sky, the first stars appearing as twilight deepened over London. Elias moved around the room, lighting a few small lamps that cast a warm glow without diminishing the view of the emerging constellations above. I wanted our first evening as husband and wife to be here, he said, standing beside the telescope where they had spent so many hours working together, falling in love without quite realizing it. This is where we truly found each other, where pretense fell away and we learned to be honest about what was growing between us. And joined him, slipping her arms around his waist and looking up at the sky through the glass dome. From pretense to truth, she murmured. From humiliation to honor. From loneliness to love. From isolation to partnership, he added softly, turning in her arms to face her. I spent 5 years alone, Anne. 5 years focused only on restoring my father's name, convinced that I needed nothing and no one else. You showed me how wrong I was. You showed me that life is meant to be shared, that love makes everything more meaningful. She reached up to trace the strong line of his jaw, marveling that this man was now her husband, that their pretend courtship had led them here. When you whispered to me in the church that day, did you have any idea where it would lead? Not the slightest, he admitted with a smile. I only knew that you shouldn't have to stand alone while others whispered about you. I knew what that felt like, and I couldn't bear to see you suffer it. And now neither of us stands alone, Anne said softly. Now we stand together, he agreed, lowering his head to kiss her. Always. Outside, London continued its evening bustle, unaware of the quiet transformation taking place in the observatory above. Society would talk about them, would gossip about the romance between the disgraced Marquis and the jilted lady who had found vindication and love together. But Anne no longer cared about society's whispers. One by one, Elias extinguished the lamps until only a single flame remained, casting their shadows against the curved wall of the observatory. He drew her close, his kiss gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that had been building between them for months, no longer restrained by propriety or pretense. Anne responded in kind, her arms encircling his neck as the last barriers between them fell away. There was no more need for caution, no more rules to follow. They were husband and wife, partners in every sense, free to express the love that had grown from such unexpected beginnings. Above them, the night sky revealed itself fully as the final lamp was extinguished. Stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet, ancient lights bearing witness to their union. Through the telescope, planets moved in their eternal dance, indifferent to human drama yet somehow blessing it with their presence. In the church wherein had once faced her greatest humiliation, she had found unexpected redemption. In the man society had shunned, she had discovered her greatest champion and truest love. Their journey from pretense to truth had transformed them both, healing wounds they hadn't known could be healed. As the observatory door closed softly behind them, Anne thought of how a single whispered suggestion had changed the course of her life. "Pretend you are waiting for me." 7 words that had altered both their fates. She wasn't pretending anymore. She had found exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who respected her intelligence, valued her courage, and loved her completely for who she was. Their story had begun with deception, but it had blossomed into the most honest, most real thing either of them had ever known. In the years that followed, Elias would continue his scientific work, with Anne as his partner and collaborator. They would publish papers together, her name alongside his, breaking conventions as they had from the beginning. The Ravensleigh name would be restored not just through vindication, but through new innovations and discoveries. But on this night, their wedding night, they stood together in the observatory watching stars wheel overhead, 2 people who had found each other at their lowest moments and lifted each other to heights neither had dreamed possible. From pretense to truth. From humiliation to honor. From loneliness to love. Their journey was complete, and their real life together was just beginning.